When you think of masters of modern Japanese martial arts, who comes to mind? A generation ago, the answers might have included Jigoro Kano, Hakudo Nakayama, Hideo Sonobe, Morihei Ueshiba, Chokimo Tabu, Gichin Funakoshi, Mitsuyo Maeda. Each of them was a true warrior who reached the peak of their respective modern martial arts paths. Japan, the birthplace of so many martial traditions, has produced countless renowned martial artists. The list of names could go on forever. But when talking about the great masters of modern Japanese martial arts, there is one person whose name is almost never mentioned. Even among those who love Japanese martial arts history or the history of karate, if you found this picture, you must be a true enthusiast. Normally, this person is only briefly mentioned with the caption, Mas Oyama's teacher, but no further explanation of his background is ever given. This is the same even within Japan. The person we'll introduce today was the right-hand man, among the closest of close aides, to Gogen Yamaguchi, the de facto founder of Japanese mainland Goju-Ryu karate on the Japanese mainland, the style that inspired Mr. Miyagi's karate in the movie The Karate Kid. He held a 9 dan in karate, awarded by the Dai Nippon Butoku Kai, and trained in judo under Tatsukuma Ushijima and Seizaburo Fukushima, the same Ushijima who taught judo legend Masahiko Kimura. In judo, he held a 4 dan. He was one of the karate masters who had the greatest influence on Mas Oyama, the founder of Kyokushin karate, who is known for his dramatic and turbulent life in the martial arts. And yet, at a certain point in time, Oyama began to deliberately conceal this man's name. Even when compared with Mas Oyama's larger-than-life journey, this man's life is no less impressive. Despite such an incredible background, the details of his life and character are almost never spoken of. In his youth, he sympathized with Marxist ideology, landing him in and out of detention. Later, he became deeply devoted to the Greater East Asia ideology, Daitowa Shiso, promoted by Ishihara Kanji, one of the masterminds behind the Manchurian Incident, a major event that left its mark on world history. He even served as Ishihara Kanji's bodyguard and became one of his most trusted aides. At that time, he was teaching karate as a head instructor at what was then the largest judo dojo in Japan, a dojo that included none other than Masahiko Kimura among its students. After the war, he developed strong connections with both the Yakuza underworld and right-wing political circles. He was deeply involved in a post-war conflict with a certain organization. Later in life, he was awarded a top-class decoration by the government of a foreign country, and was even granted an audience with that country's president. At one point, a political career was also expected of him. It's no exaggeration to say that his life condenses the hidden, complex layers of Japan before, during, and after the war. This video focuses on his life in martial arts, based on various documents and interview articles. We also lightly touch on the political movements and ideological currents that surrounded him. His name is So Neichu. So Neichu was a Korean born in 1908, 2 years before Korea was officially annexed by Japan. In this video, we'll refer to him using the Japanese reading of his name, So Neichu, rather than the Korean pronunciation. Around that time, Korea was caught between 3 major powers. China wanted to maintain its traditional influence. Japan sought to use Korea as a stepping stone for expanding into the Asian continent. And Russia aimed to gain access to a warm water port by extending its influence into Korea. After winning the Sino-Japanese War and the Russo-Japanese War, Japan annexed Korea. When So was around 5 or 6 years old, he attended a school where the curriculum was still critical of Japan, which had only recently become the ruling colonial power. Much of the content praised China and encouraged students to hold it in high regard. Later, when he entered middle school in Seoul, he began assisting in small tasks for the Korean independence movement. Then, in 1923, something happened that left a lasting impact on the 15-year-old. While he was collecting donations for victims of a massive earthquake that had struck mainland Japan, he learned that Koreans were being massacred throughout the Kanto region, including in Tokyo. The shock of this discovery would stay with him for years. In 1929, he became involved in the Gwangju student independence movement. The incident that sparked it occurred on a train during Japan's colonial rule of Korea. A group of Japanese students mocked a Korean female student, and when Korean students stood up in protest, a fight broke out. However, only the Korean students were arrested. Outraged, So Neichu took part in the growing student resistance. He traveled between middle schools in Seoul, encouraging students to join in a large-scale school strike and coordinated class boycotts. Through these experiences, So gradually came to pursue Korean independence through Marxist ideology. According to his own account, the social atmosphere at the time was such that many highly educated individuals sympathized with the Soviet Union. He too became deeply drawn to Marxist thought. In 1931, seeking a deeper understanding of the ideology, he moved to mainland Japan and enrolled at Kyoto Imperial University. He joined an affiliate organization of the Japanese Communist Party based in Kyoto. This group included more than 600 Korean international students, and so quickly rose to become a leading figure among them. That same year, the environment surrounding Japan underwent a dramatic shift. On September 18, 1931, the Kwantung Army, acting on the independent orders of staff officers Ishihara Kanji and Seishiro Itagaki, blew up a section of the South Manchuria Railway, operated by Japan, and falsely blamed it on the Chinese military. They used this as a pretext to launch combat and occupy Manchuria. Japanese military leadership later retroactively approved Ishihara and his group's actions. In 1932, Japan established the puppet state of Manchukuo. The League of Nations condemned Japan's actions, and in response, Japan withdrew from the League in 1933. Japan became increasingly isolated from the international community. Tensions with China escalated rapidly, ultimately leading to the outbreak of the Second Sino-Japanese War in 1937. This was a major turning point in modern world history. Meanwhile, So was also studying both boxing and weightlifting. It's said that both sports had become popular in Korea even before they took hold in Japan. He competed as part of the Shochiku boxing team, won by TKO, and became the university bantamweight champion. Thanks to his physical strength, he was chosen to serve as the bodyguard for Professor Kawakami Hajime, a well-known leftist thinker. So also became a central figure in the street-level action groups, and was reportedly entrusted with leading military operations in the event of a future armed revolution. During this period, a major incident of ideological suppression occurred in 1933, known as the Takigawa Incident. Takigawa Yukitoki, a legal scholar, had advocated for liberal interpretations of criminal law in lectures at Chuo University and in his book Criminal Law Reader. This clashed with the views of Japan's Ministry of Education at the time and was labeled Marxist in nature. The book was banned, which set off a chain of events leading to mass resignations by university professors and large numbers of law students dropping out. This incident marked a significant turning point. Freedom in academic research and teaching was severely restricted in mainland Japan. Scholars and students were now expected to cooperate with government and military policies. So withdrew from Kyoto Imperial University and transferred to the night program at Ritsumeikan University. Soon after, under increasing government pressure, senior members of the Japanese Communist Party began issuing public statements of ideological conversion, and many party members followed suit. For So, who had devoted himself as a frontline activist, this was a shocking and disillusioning turn of events. It was at this moment that he realized, under the current situation in mainland Japan, achieving Korean independence through Marxist ideology was no longer possible. Izumikawa Kanki, a senior disciple of Higaseko, who served as the first vice president of the Okinawa Karate Federation, opened the oldest so-called Okinawan traditional Goju-Ryu dojo on the Japanese mainland. However, separate from that lineage, Yamaguchi Gogen established the Goju-Ryu Karate Kenpo dojo on the mainland. Although there are various nuances and potential for misunderstanding, for convenience, this video will refer to it as Mainland Goju-Ryu. At Ritsumeikan University, So joined the karate club led by Yamaguchi Gogen, the de facto founder of mainland Japan's Goju-Ryu school, which had only recently been established. With his boxing background, So quickly stood out within the club and naturally assumed a leadership role, almost like a captain. It was as if he were trying to fill the ideological void he now felt by throwing himself fully into martial arts. In 1935 and 1936, Miyagi Chojun visited from Okinawa, and together with Yamaguchi, provided advanced instruction. Miyagi had originally studied Toda, Tang Hand, in Okinawa, and later traveled to China, where he learned both northern and southern Chinese boxing styles. He then blended these with elements of Japanese jujutsu, which is why, according to So, Goju-Ryu includes many throwing techniques. At the time, there were ongoing experiments with free sparring using protective gear, a practice that was still being referred to as tagumi. But whenever So showed up in full gear, most of the club members would simply disappear. The same thing reportedly happened later at the Jihokai dojo, which will be mentioned later. Very few people could handle sparring under those intense conditions. So admitted that he had a particularly hard time dealing with the kicks of Okamura, the third founding member of the karate club. There were also two exceptionally strong students from judo backgrounds, Ujita Shozo, who later founded Kenbukan, and another man named Nakamura. The man in the center right is So. In front of him is Ujita, who would later become known for his prowess in free sparring and founded the Kenbukan dojo. The small child is the eldest son of Yamaguchi Gogen. The bearded man in the back center, who is considered equal in skill to Ujita, is Nakamura. Tragically, Nakamura took his own life on the battlefield at the end of the war by committing seppuku. So later said with deep regret, "If I had been by his side, I never would have let him do that." For sparring, they used a kendo face guard, a bayonet fencing breastplate, boxing gloves, and shin guards from hockey. Altogether, the gear was heavy and unwieldy. Those without a solid base of physical strength simply couldn't keep up. Miyagi Chojun, the founder of Goju-Ryu, was initially opposed to sparring, known at the time as tagumi, believing that it would break down the proper form, kata, of karate. However, in the end, Yamaguchi and So were able to persuade him. So held a firm belief that if karate were ever to become an Olympic sport, protective gear would be essential for safety and accessibility. Still, he never believed kata should be discarded. On the contrary, he argued that kata represented the very heart of karate, illustrating how to precisely strike the vital points of the human body. That, he claimed, was the true essence of the art. He also rejected the use of high kicks above the waist in real combat situations, considering them impractical. When Miyagi returned from his training tours and visited Kyoto, he often stayed at Yamaguchi's house. This meant that So had the rare privilege of listening to Miyagi's philosophy of karate almost every night. Miyagi would often say, "When performing kata, you must throw yourself into it with total abandon. You should be so focused that you hear nothing else while doing it." As the number of members in the karate club grew, a larger training space became necessary. So they began using one of the largest judo dojos in Japan at the time, Gihokai. There, So began teaching karate. The head of Gihokai, Fukushima Seizaburo, and Yamaguchi Gogen were both from Kyushu. Fukushima is second from the left in the front row, behind him is So, and Yamaguchi is fourth from the left in the front row. Fukushima was a martial arts instructor for the Dai Nippon Butokukai and at the National Foundation University in Manchuria, then a puppet state established by Japan in northeastern China, and he visited Manchuria every year. Around 1938, So considered returning to Marxist activism in Manchuria, thinking the ideological repression there was less severe than on the Japanese mainland. He considered using Fukushima's connections to make it happen. But as it turned out, meeting Fukushima would ultimately guide So in the exact opposite ideological direction. Gihokai had been founded by Fukushima, together with Ushijima Tatsukuma, who had trained Kimura Masahiko, the legendary judoka who later defeated Helio Gracie, father of Hickson and Hoist Gracie. So also had a very close relationship with Ushijima, and even called him Aniki, a term of deep respect, like big brother. Through this connection, So learned judo directly from Ushijima and eventually earned a 4th Dan black belt. Because of this strong relationship, whenever Ushijima brought Kimura to the dojo, So would often be the one teaching karate to him. As mentioned at the beginning, Ishihara Kanji, the mastermind behind the Manchurian incident, which set Japan on the path to war, envisioned the creation of an East Asia Federation under the Japanese emperor. This federation would include Japan, Manchuria, China, and Korea, and would promote joint defense, economic integration, political independence, and cultural exchange. Ishihara consistently argued that each region should maintain its own autonomy. Yamaguchi, Fukushima, and Ushijima were all passionate supporters of Ishihara's vision, and the Kihokai Dojo functioned in practice as a kind of salon for the East Asia Federation. At first, Yamaguchi served as head instructor, with So as assistant instructor. But in 1939, when Yamaguchi received a special assignment from Ishihara and began intelligence operations in Manchuria under the Kyokushin organization, Fukushima appointed So as the new head instructor. At the same time, So was also appointed director of a student dormitory for international students, called Kyowajuku, which Fukushima had built next door to the dojo. This dorm housed residents from China, Korea, Southeast Asia, and even people of Japanese descent from abroad. So had planned to follow Yamaguchi to Manchuria, but Fukushima, who had come to greatly admire So's martial skill and sharp intellect, refused to let him go.
ダメ。
As a result, those plans were ultimately abandoned. So also spoke highly of Fukushima, describing him as a man who judged others purely on merit, without the slightest trace of ethnic prejudice, a fair, selfless individual. It's clear that So placed complete trust in him. Among So's students were many who would go on to become members of the National Diet or executives of major companies. It was around this time that a high school student named Oyama Masutatsu, later to become the founder of Kyokushin karate, visited the dojo. So recalled this as their first encounter. However, Oyama himself told a different story, that he had first heard So give a speech in Busan, Korea, as part of East Asia League activities. Deeply moved by the ideals of the movement, he sought to learn more and came to the mainland to find So. During that visit, So taught him only the fundamentals, how to strike the makiwara, how to kick properly, but full training would come later, after the war. At that time, Oyama hadn't even started practicing judo. Still a boy in both age and physique, Oyama was slim, well-mannered, and respectful. But So recalled that even then, his voice was deep and carried a distinct sense of intensity and presence. One day, a dojo challenger,
頼もう。
claiming to hold high ranks in both judo and karate, came to Gihokai. So stepped forward to represent the dojo. The match ended with the challenger losing consciousness. No one present could quite grasp what had happened. Later, Masutatsu Oyama reportedly said to So, "After all of us analyzed it over and over, we figured maybe you struck his groin, then followed up with a headbutt to the nose. Is that correct?" To which So simply replied, "It all happened in an instant. How should I know?" It's said that the famous judoka Kimura Masahiko was also present that day. Martial arts historian Harry Cook recounts another anecdote about So's fighting prowess in one of his writings. Funakoshi Gichin had resisted introducing kumite to his classes ever since his arrival in Tokyo in 1922, but his ardent young students, preparing for what they anticipated would be an inevitable war, demanded a more realistic and exciting training regimen than the repetition of kata and basics. Under the influence of Funakoshi's son, Gigo, and some of the university club presidents, Funakoshi gradually allowed Jiu Kumite. With the ardency of youth, soft sparring soon became hard contact fighting, and rivalries began to develop between the various schools. At this time in Japan, all karate styles remained relatively open to interaction with each other, and the Shidokan people in the Tokyo area began to hear about the tough fighters practicing a different style in the Osaka area. Naturally, a competition was arranged. According to a widespread story, Funakoshi Gigo picked 10 of his best competitors and traveled to Osaka to engage in an inter-school match. At some point during this competition, apparently in the last match, after all the other Shotokan people had lost to their Goju-Ryu counterparts, Funakoshi Gigo squared off against So Neichu. The powerful So simply picked up the smaller Funakoshi and threw him against a wall, injuring not only his body but his dignity. Funakoshi complained that such actions were against the rules, gathered up his group, and departed. It is said that after returning to Tokyo, the Shotokan schools intensified their study of kumite and stepped up its intensity, resulting in their later fearsome reputation in tournament competition. In January of 1939, So Neichu was introduced by Fukushima to General Ishihara Kanji. Alongside two friends, he met the general at a small inn. Ishihara had formerly served as the Imperial Army attaché at the Japanese Embassy in Manchukuo as of August 18, 1938. However, he openly criticized Lieutenant General Tojo Hideki, then Chief of Staff of the Kwantung Army, for his approach to governing Manchukuo. As a result, Ishihara was dismissed and reassigned to the coastal fortress of Maizuru on December 5th. In March 1941, he was placed in the reserves, effectively sidelined from power. Many believe his repeated confrontations with Tojo led directly to his demotion. Ushijima Tatsukuma, So's mentor and the teacher of Kimura Masahiko, was also a fervent supporter of the East Asia Federation. He was arrested just before attempting an act of terrorism against Tojo himself. When So and his friends arrived, Ishihara emerged from the bath dressed in traditional Chinese clothing. Seeing the three men seated formally in seiza, he remarked, "Relax, no need for formality." He looked around and asked, "Which one of you is So-kun?" When So identified himself, Ishihara said something that left a lasting impression. "You see? You can't tell just by looking who is Korean and who is Japanese. Why then must we fight each other? These fights must stop, and it is Japan that must stop them." He also spoke of granting full autonomy to Koreans. While these words resonated deeply with So, he still found the repeated references to the emperor and the national polity jarring. It felt, to him, like these might simply be tactics to pacify and co-opt the Korean people. Caught between suspicion and admiration, So began to draw closer to the East Asia Federation. He attended all of Ishihara's public speeches and even helped with the general's relocation, bringing along students from the Gihokai dojo to assist. Despite this growing involvement, he remained hesitant about formally joining the Federation. In every speech, Ishihara emphasized that the East's spiritual culture, led by Japan, must unite, and that material progress, as seen in the West, would follow naturally. He argued that war with China was nothing more than a civil war and should be stopped immediately. What impressed So most was Ishihara's consistency. Even when labeled far-right or even communist by his critics, Ishihara never wavered in his message. Moved by this conviction, So finally decided to join the East Asia Federation. In 1940, Yamaguchi Gogen returned temporarily to Japan. During his time in Manchuria, Yamaguchi had been engaged in special operations, working within local municipal offices, gathering intelligence on resistance groups such as bandits, and conducting pacification activities. He also developed ties with martial artists from China, Korea, and Mongolia. Of particular note, he often remarked that the techniques of Mongolian book, traditional wrestling, were incredibly instructive and influenced his understanding of combat. Bringing a martial delegation with him from Manchuria, Yamaguchi organized a grand East Asian martial arts exhibition at Korakuen, near today's Kodokan Judo headquarters. The event was a showcase of martial traditions from across East Asia. From China came renowned masters of Kung Fu. Demonstrations of various weapons arts were featured. Mongolian wrestlers performed traditional book. From Japan, the Dai Nippon Butokukai and the Gihokai demonstrated judo. And representing karate, Yamaguchi and So Neichu, both from Ritsumeikan University's Goju-Ryu club, performed a tegumi, sparring exhibition. According to So, the bout between him and Yamaguchi was intense, with attacks and defenses exchanged at what seemed like striking distance, giving the impression they were truly hitting each other. The display was said to be quite powerful and gripping to watch. Later, Yamaguchi confided that the match had felt like a life-or-death battle. Although So had once advocated for Korean independence, he eventually began to support reconciliation between Japan and Korea, and the ideal of ethnic harmony in Manchukuo, where 5 peoples, Japanese, Manchurian, Korean, Chinese, and Mongolian, were to coexist. Yet even as he engaged with this vision, he remained acutely aware of its contradictions. In the February 1940 issue of Odo Bunka, the East Asia League's official journal, he criticized the ongoing prejudice against non-Japanese peoples and the Japanese public's obliviousness to it. This suggests that, at least early on, So did not blindly accept all of the League's ideology. He still saw through its hypocrisies. At the same time, he had grown disillusioned with the prospect of Korean independence through communism or self-determination. Instead, he came to believe that it could only be realized under Japan's leadership, specifically through the East Asia Federation's movement, guided by the emperor. He hoped this might bring about a form of autonomous self-governance for Koreans. However, as the Federation began to attract criticism, accused by both the government and civilians of supporting Korean independence and harboring communist sympathies, public sentiment increasingly viewed it as a subversive organization. In response, the East Asia Federation began to reposition itself, claiming that it was in fact the very entity preventing Korean separatism. This marked a departure from General Ishihara's original vision, as he had told So during their first meeting that he wanted to grant Koreans full autonomy. Nevertheless, by this time, So had grown deeply loyal to Ishihara, seeing him as a man of noble character, persecuted for his honesty. He began to turn a blind eye to Korea's mistreatment, and instead focused his energy on scolding his fellow Koreans for failing to see the righteous vision of Japan. In essence, So had shifted ideologically, from advocating for Korean independence to embracing a vision of Korean-Japanese unity under the emperor. At the time, the policy of Nisei-Yua, harmony between Japan and Korea, was being promoted, under which both mainland Japanese and those living in Korea were considered children of the same emperor. The Korean language was suppressed, and the use of the common language, Japanese, was enforced. Since the emperor was regarded as a deity at the time, Koreans were also forced to visit Shinto shrines and worship the emperor in the same way as Japanese people. Korean-style names were abolished, and Koreans were compelled to adopt Japanese-style names. However, this so-called harmony was in name only. Koreans were required to carry an identification booklet called the Kyowa Techo, Harmony Handbook, which included a photograph, registered domicile, address, occupation, and other personal details. There were also sections to record donations for military aircraft and national defense, making one's loyalty to Japan immediately visible. It is said that those who fled their workplaces could be captured and even killed. Meanwhile, Japanese people were allowed to change jobs and did not even have such a handbook. Years later, Ishihara would reflect on So's ideological transformation. At first, Mr. So was outraged by unjust ethnic discrimination and became a fervent independence activist. But after entering Professor Fukushima's dojo in Kyoto, he was treated with such reverence, so sensei, that his drive for independence softened. Then came the ideas of the East Asia League. He realized clearly, indeed, pursuing something like Korean independence is an anachronistic sin. And so, he began to promote that belief to his Korean brethren, for the sake of the emperor's nation. The following year, on December 7, 1941, the Pacific War broke out. As So continued his work with the East Asia Federation, he was eventually granted the title of Sanyo, an official advisor. Although many Koreans were involved in the group, So was the only one to rise to such a senior rank. According to So, Ishihara envisioned that while the East Asia League would take the lead for now, Manchukuo would eventually achieve true independence. This outlook made the Federation a threat in the eyes of the far-right faction led by Prime Minister Tojo. For them, the group was a nuisance that undermined their agenda, and the fact that one of its core members was a Korean only intensified their suspicion. Eventually, So was accused of using the East Asia Federation as a cover for Korean independence activism. From the perspective of the Tojo faction, eliminating the Federation became a priority. They wanted the public to believe that, left unchecked, the organization would become a hotbed for separatist movements. In that narrative, So became the perfect scapegoat. In the spring of 1942, he was arrested and imprisoned for nearly 2 years as a political offender. During his confinement, he was subjected to interrogation, and at times, torture. This came just as he was preparing to begin formally teaching karate to Oyama Masutatsu. So later recalled how the military police questioned him day after day with the same line of inquiry. His response remained consistent. Ethnic movements do not necessarily equate to independence sentiment. Emotionally, yes, I want my people to be free. But even if I harbor frustration, I believe the East Asia Federation's approach offers more hope for the happiness of my people and aligns better with the direction of history. That's why I choose to suppress my emotions and follow that path. I am not the kind of man who would launch an impulsive independence movement driven solely by nationalistic feeling. While in prison, he was permitted to read, so long as the material wasn't in a foreign language. He read extensively about Buddhism and ultimately became a follower of Nichiren Buddhism. In the court documents from the time, his name is listed as Ishijima Neichu, a clear sign of the Japanese-imposed name change policy known as Soshi Kaimei. This was part of Japan's assimilation strategy, which forced Koreans to adopt Japanese-style names. After his release from prison, So deepened his devotion to Nichiren Buddhism, the same sect followed by Ishihara, and in doing so, earned even more of Ishihara's trust. He relocated to Tokyo and became increasingly dedicated to the East Asia Federation. Soon after his release at Ishihara's request, So traveled to Korea and met with Lieutenant General Itagaki Seishiro, the commander of the Korean-Japanese Army. So relayed Ishihara's belief that the Pacific War would ultimately end in Japan's defeat. He was also instructed to deliver a substantial document, Guidelines for Manchurian-Mongolian Development, to Kanji Kato, the head of a youth training program for Japanese settlers in Manchuria and Inner Mongolia. These missions underscored just how much Ishihara trusted So. By this time, So had begun to express a sense of reverence for the emperor, an attitude not found in his earlier years. Through his ties to the East Asia Federation, So was given ownership of a judo dojo in Akasaka, Tokyo, known as Shidokan. There he taught karate. At the time, Shidokan was one of the largest dojos in Tokyo, second only to the famed Kodokan. Upon hearing that So was teaching there, Kimura Masahiko, Japan's legendary judoka, would often visit the dojo to train in karate under him. While living at the dojo, So was given the task of supervising Korean laborers who had been conscripted by the authorities to work at an aircraft factory in Kawasaki. He also taught them Japanese. These Korean conscripts, choyoko, were often assigned grueling jobs such as mining, undersea coal extraction, flood control, and dock labor. They were rarely paid fairly, if at all, and many suffered under harsh working conditions. Abuse by site supervisors was rampant, and while it was once common for Koreans like So to serve in such supervisory roles, even that became less frequent over time. Deaths, injuries, and escapes were reportedly widespread. It is said that between 1939 and the end of the war, at least 700,000 Koreans were conscripted into forced labor in Japan. Living conditions were also appalling. Workers were often housed in flimsy barracks without proper sewage systems. Some of the areas where their descendants still live today remain stigmatized. The roads are very narrow and winding, like a maze. Even now, though the infrastructure may be modernized, crossing just a single road can reveal a stark difference in atmosphere, making the legacy of those settlements still visible in subtle ways. Incidentally, on the opposite side of the road from this area, there is the oldest Goju-Ryu dojo, the headquarters of the International Karate-Do Senbukai, which predates Gogen Yamaguchi's mainland Goju-Ryu. This is the other place. At the time, it was standard practice to evacuate conscripted laborers during American bombing raids. However, in many cases, these workers simply took the opportunity to flee given their treatment. One day, the Kawasaki factory where So worked was hit by a bombing raid. But the next morning, every single laborer returned to work. This unusual loyalty caught the attention of Asahi Shimbun, which praised the incident with surprise in a featured report. So was also listed as the director of labor for Ishinkai, an organization involved in constructing underground airfields, mainly using Korean forced labor. On May 25, 1945, a Tokyo air raid destroyed the Shidokan dojo. Losing both his workplace and residence, So relied on the personal network he had built through the East Asia Federation, moving from one acquaintance's home to another until the end of the war. In August of that year, after learning that the atomic bomb had been dropped on Hiroshima, he evacuated to Gunma Prefecture. It was there that he greeted the end of the war. Ishihara, bedridden at the time, was called to testify in the Tokyo trials. He was taken to a special court session in Sakata, reportedly pulled in a cart by none other than So and Mas Oyama. Ishihara had long been in conflict with Tojo, who was ultimately convicted as a war criminal and executed. Because of his opposition to Tojo, Ishihara avoided being tried as a war criminal himself. Following Japan's defeat, Korean residents in Japan were split, not by regional origin, such as Northern or Southern Korea, but by ideology. Some aligned with North Korea, others with South. So became deeply involved in this period of upheaval, standing at the center of events affecting Zainichi Koreans. Just 2 months after the end of the war, on October 15, 1945, the League of Koreans in Japan was formed, led primarily by communists who would later align with the North Korean government. During colonial rule, many Koreans had settled in Japan. Unlike other colonial powers that allowed these migrants to gain citizenship in the former ruling country or return to their homeland, Japan stripped them of their nationality altogether. Combined with unpaid wages and strict restrictions on bringing property back to Korea, many Koreans found themselves unable to return. These sudden legal and social uncertainties caused roughly 90% of the Korean population in Japan to join the newly founded League of Koreans in Japan. While the group's founding charter included aims like ensuring stability in the lives of Korean residents, facilitating safe and orderly repatriation, and promoting mutual goodwill with the Japanese people, many who joined likely expected support with claiming unpaid wages and repatriation logistics. However, the League had deep ties with the then-violent Japanese Communist Party, which has since renounced violent methods, and received financial support from them. It quickly developed a radical communist character, often resorting to aggressive tactics to achieve its aims. In some cases, League members acted as the vanguard for these actions. In the chaos that followed Japan's defeat, resentment built up over years of discrimination and oppression spilled out in various parts of the country. This unrest included assaults, looting, theft, unreasonable demands made to government offices, unlawful occupation of buildings, fare evasion on public transportation, and even instances of so-called people's tribunals. Memories of this era still fuel deep-rooted resentment in Japan towards Zainichi Koreans and the Japanese Communist Party. In more recent decades, incidents such as North Korea's abduction of Japanese citizens and ongoing international disputes, including lawsuits by former Korean wartime laborers seeking post-war compensation, have further intensified this animosity. Returning to the story, those Koreans who had cooperated with the Japanese government or military during the colonial era became targets of public denunciation by the League of Koreans in Japan. Some had their property confiscated, while others faced threats or even assassination. One prominent example was Park Chun-kun, the first Korean to be elected to Japan's imperial parliament before the war. He had made great efforts to become a model Japanese and once personally appealed to the Japanese Prime Minister to establish a system allowing Korean volunteers to serve in the military. Among communist circles, a hit list circulated with the names of 9 individuals, including Park, marked for assassination. His home was attacked, though he was not present at the time and escaped harm. Later, under pressure, he was forced to donate some of his real estate holdings and other assets. So, as a devoted follower of the East Asia League's ideals, believing in the co-prosperity of multiple ethnicities under the emperor's leadership was also viewed with hostility. His acceptance of assimilation policies and his role in overseeing conscripted Korean laborers under the Ishin-kai group marked him as a collaborator. For many Korean communists, this made him a traitor to his people. Anti-communist Korean youths in Japan who held nationalist views established a separate organization in November of the same year. Among them was Cheonggaeon-yong, a well-known Yakuza boss based in Ginza who resonated with So's ideology. Together with So and others, he played a central role in the formation of the Korean Youth League for the Promotion of Nation Building, a secretive group about which various accounts exist. So served as the league's leader for 3 terms. Oyama, also a supporter of the East Asia Federation, once again sought out So and resumed serious karate training under his guidance. That same year, So and Oyama established the Karate-Do Research Institute within the League's Central Youth Training Center. In January of the following year, 1946, a group of anti-communist members who had broken away ideologically from the League of Koreans in Japan formed a new organization called the New Korea Construction League. By October of that year, the New Korea Construction League merged with the Korean Youth League, leading to the formation of the League of Korean Residents in Japan, a group with more explicit anti-communist leanings that would later become aligned with South Korea. These groups clashed violently on Japanese soil, and it is said that Oyama, Jung, and others stood at the forefront of these conflicts. Later, So also served as the leader of this organization. As a side note, the League's first chairman, Park Yeol, was reportedly kidnapped by North Korean special forces during a banquet in South Korea and later executed in North Korea. In the aftermath of World War II, tensions among Koreans living in Japan escalated into violent clashes. On February 27, 1946, the Second Extraordinary National Convention of the Korean Residents' Union in Japan was held at Nagatacho National School. The meeting became chaotic over the issue of supporting the Korean People's Republic. The right-wing faction of the Union distributed flyers calling for the expulsion of communists from the organization. This sparked a brawl between the right-wing group led by Jung Gaeon-young and the left-wing faction. During the conflict, Jung Chol, a right-wing leader affiliated with the Korean Residents' Union, shot a young left-wing activist in the abdomen. On the night of July 19th of the same year, Kim Cheon-hae, a leader among the communists, told members of Minchong, the pro-North Korean youth organization, that the young members of Jeonchong, the pro-South Korean youth group, were troublesome, and that he would personally talk to them. The Minchong members interpreted this as an order to abduct, insult, and assault the Jeonchong youths. At 1:30 a.m. on July 20th, about 100 Minchong members armed with pistols, Japanese swords, and clubs traveled in 3 trucks, broke through an American military police checkpoint at Rokugo Bridge, and attacked the Kawasaki City Yotsuya branch office of Gyeonchong. They then assaulted Korean residences in Sakuragicho, abducted 10 Jeonchong leaders, and took them to Minchong's hideout in Itabashi, where they were beaten. On the same day, Minchong members also attacked the Jeonchong headquarters branch. Meanwhile, Gyeonchong members attacked branches of the Korean Residents Union in Arakawa and Ueno. On July 22nd, the MP Command summoned representatives of the Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department's Security Division, the Korean Residents Union, and Gyeonchong to its headquarters to issue a warning aimed at preventing further outbreaks of violence. On August 15, 1948, the government of South Korea was officially established. The same year in September, the Korean Residents Union in Japan, known as Mindan, was formally recognized by the South Korean government as the official organization representing Koreans living in Japan. With a strong anti-communist stance, Mindan began to build closer ties with Japan's right-wing groups and even connections in the underworld. It has since come to light through various reports that prominent figures within Japan's right-wing circles, as well as Yakuza organizations, were deeply involved in anti-communist activities, with the CIA playing a behind-the-scenes role in supporting these efforts. At the time, since the Syngman Rhee administration had become president with the backing of the U.S. government, it was easy to control. Interestingly, despite what might seem like natural hostility, South Korea's government and Japan's right-wing groups maintained a secret alliance. For the U.S., both acted as a barrier against the spread of communism. During this period, Korea set aside post-war compensation issues, while Japan put aside territorial disputes, such as the claim over Takeshima, known as Dokdo in Korea. Both sides cooperated with the shared goal of resisting communism. However, after the Cold War ended and the communist threat diminished, South Korea transitioned to civilian government. As a result, Japan's right-wing groups lost their direct links to Korea. Long-ignored issues like compensation and territorial disputes resurfaced and escalated. Today, relations between Japan and South Korea have worsened to their lowest point since the war, and repairing this relationship remains extremely difficult. Meanwhile, the Korean Residents Union in Japan affiliated with the communist camp was ordered dissolved by the Allied General Headquarters, GHQ, on September 8, 1949, labeled a violent organization. Their assets were confiscated, but successor groups still exist today. Ishihara passed away in August 1948. So served as the master of ceremonies at his funeral. At the ceremony, So declared, "I am Korean. I will never forget the special kindness shown by the deceased throughout my life. Even if all Japanese turn against the emperor, we, the Korean Youth Alliance, will continue to protect the emperor." After the war, the Allied GHQ banned all Japanese martial arts. However, the ban on martial arts was not applied to Koreans. One of Toyama Kankan's top disciples, a Korean national named Yoon Hee-bong, served as the nominal head of the Kanbukan, now Renbukan, which was in fact run by famous karate researcher Kinjo Hiroshi. It is recorded that So frequented the dojo along with Oyama. So held the title of honorary Shihan, while Oyama served as a Shihan instructor. It was around this time that Hiroshi Kinjo first met Mas Oyama, who at the time went by the name Sai Muko. In an interview, Hiroshi Kinjo said the following: "The Hanbukan was a facility belonging to an organization of Zainichi Koreans, which Mr. Yun was borrowing free of charge and using as a dojo. On the sign next to the entrance, it said, Greater Korea Nation Founding Promotion Alliance. I believe I was introduced to Mr. Yun in the fall of 1946. At first, I thought Saimuko was his real name, but one day I happened to see an ID card on his desk and realized it wasn't. It seemed that Mr. Yun wanted Mas Oyama to teach, but I never actually saw Mas Oyama instructing anyone. I was doing my own training. I had meals with Mr. So as well, and I was impressed that he was someone without any ethnic or racial prejudice. He once showed me how he swung the kusarigama, chain sickle too. According to Nagayuki Iwagami, former advisor to the Goju-Kai, So left the impression of being a good-natured and gentle person in terms of personality, but his strength in sparring was in a class of its own. Perhaps because So himself had undergone extraordinary training since his youth, his instruction was extremely severe. But to So, who considered such severity to be normal, it seems he didn't even recognize it as harsh. Iwagami says that So trained while smiling and looking genuinely happy. So practiced both sparring and kata forms, but also thoroughly instructed in weight training. Furthermore, according to Iwagami, So was also the boxing lightweight champion among the 6 major universities in the Kansai region. While other martial arts were forced into a hiatus lasting several years, karate continued to progress. In a 1979 interview, So offered his perspective on Japan's colonial rule over Korea, presenting a nuanced and controversial view. Looking back, even Japan's government general system had its positive sides. For example, if you look at how the British ruled India, they avoided giving the Indian people education, using them only as a labor force. There's a colonial model that says it's better to keep people ignorant, like cattle or horses, because knowledge leads to dissatisfaction. So they taxed education heavily? Meanwhile, they turned a blind eye to independence speeches by the Indian National Congress. But Japan, by contrast, at least made efforts toward assimilation. In May 1990, So spoke at the first memorial training event marking the 1-year anniversary of Gogen Yamaguchi's passing. In the commemorative group photo, Yamaguchi's son Goshi, then head of the organization, is seated in the center of the second row, with So beside him on the left. At the time, So served as the special advisor of the organization. To go back in time a bit, Mas Oyama, who looked up to judoka Masahiko Kimura like an older brother and personal hero, was deeply upset when Kimura was defeated in a professional wrestling match under suspicious circumstances. The match was against Rikidozan, a Korean-born wrestler who had become a national hero in Japan through his success in both Korean wrestling, Sirium, and sumo, before founding professional wrestling in Japan. At the time, most Japanese were unaware of Rikidozan's Korean origins. Kimura lost by knockout after what many saw as a dirty trick. Infuriated, Oyama vowed revenge and began to shadow Rikidozan, looking for a chance to retaliate. It was So, alongside Jong, a longtime admirer of So from their days in nationalist movements, who stepped in and mediated peace between the two. As an aside, So shared that he had known Rikidozan's older brother back in Korea. The brother was also a Sirium wrestler, even larger and stronger than Rikidozan, but had a completely different personality, quiet and reserved. In the same interview, So remarked, Oyama never really got the hang of Japanese. His accent never went away. And that's saying something, because Rikidozan, who lived in a sumo stable, spoke even worse Japanese. So had been the most important mentor in Mas Oyama's life. In his 1958 book, What is Karate?, Oyama described So as a senior from my homeland, a philosopher, and a master of karate. A rare man, full of individuality and confidence. But from a certain point onward, Oyama stopped mentioning So entirely in his books, interviews, or public talks. Since Oyama himself never spoke about the reason, the truth remains unknown. However, one theory suggests the break may have stemmed from an incident involving one of So's closest allies, Jong, a prominent Yakuza boss, and a well-known patron of Oyama, Tanaka Seigen. Tanaka, who is now known to have been a CIA agent, was allegedly shot by one of Jong's men. Though all 3 men, Oyama, So, and Chong, had deep ties dating back to the era of Korean nationalist movements, this incident is believed by some to have driven a wedge between them. Whatever the exact cause, it is clear that something significant happened between them. Even after their falling out, so continued to speak highly of Oyama, saying, "It's undeniable that Oyama trained with all his heart and soul." So passed away in 2001. According to one account, he died quietly in a small apartment in Tokyo. His life had been one of constant upheaval, shaped and shaken by history, ideology, and the struggles of identity and nationhood. In an interview, a prominent Japanese conservative admitted he never even knew that So had practiced karate. Likewise, even among those who had trained under him, few were aware of his deeper role as a philosopher and key figure in post-war Korean nationalist movements, unless they had a close personal relationship with him. There is no doubt that So made significant contributions to Japanese martial arts and maintained meaningful connections with some of the most respected martial artists of his time. And yet, he is also a rare figure whose legacy shifts dramatically depending on the era, the observer, and their political lens. Perhaps the reason So is so rarely spoken of today lies in the sheer complexity of his life. He loved Korea, Japan, and martial arts, and was forgotten by all three. As with biographies, many of the episodes in this video are based on interviews with the person themselves, historical documents, testimonies, etc., so please be aware that not all of them are necessarily objective. There is no intention to promote or degrade any particular individual or group. Japan B is a channel that randomly shares information about lesser-known aspects of Japanese culture, spanning across various genres. He is known as Mas Oyama, the founder of Kyokushin Kaikan. But he was the first to seek a path to mixed martial arts after the war. He was one of the first striking martial artists to adopt modern weight training. Many of the episodes in the manga based on Mas Oyama are fictional. He resonated with the ideas of General Ishihara, the mastermind behind the Manchurian incident. He learned karate from Cho, who later became a leader of Koreans in Japan, and he had close ties with the bosses of the two major Korean Yakuza gangs in Japan. It is not widely known that Oyama looked up to Kimura Masahiko, who was widely regarded as the strongest fighter in actual combat, as his older brother, that he had connections with Kimura Masahiko's teacher, Ushijima Tatsukuma, and elders of various schools of karate, that he studied under Yamaguchi Gogen, the de facto founder of Hondo Goju-Ryu karate, that there was a feud between Kimura Masahiko and Rikidozan, who is said to be the father of Japanese professional wrestling, that he was the model for Ryu in the video game Street Fighter, and that Kimura Masahiko witnessed Oyama in actual combat. He is in a photo with a lineup of distinguished figures representing the Japanese martial arts world at the time, including Kyokushin karate founder Oyama, his master So, Kimura Masahiko's master Ushijima, and others. Sawai has an incredible martial arts background, with a 5th dan in judo and a 4th dan in kendo and iaido. In his prime, Sawai fought an old man who was once praised as the best master in China and was defeated as if he were a child. Since then, he trained under that man and brought the martial art back to Japan. At the time, Kyokushin karate was the most powerful brand in Japan, but Sawai's students who learned Chinese martial arts from China fought against top Kyokushin fighters in a match with their faces exposed. Among them was Matsui Shoukei, the current head of the Matsui School of Kyokushin. The result was an unexpected development. It is no exaggeration to say that Kano Jigoro, the founder of Kodokan Judo, is one of the most important figures in modern Japanese martial arts. Nearly all Japanese martial arts have adopted a rank system, and nearly all Japanese unarmed martial arts require the use of uniforms, both of which were invented by Kano. By removing dangerous techniques from jujutsu and minimizing the time lost due to long rest due to injury, it became possible to improve skills in a short period of time, and it became a subject studied in schools. Although judo is an elite martial art, what is less known is that in the early days, students competed in inter-style matches against wrestlers and boxers from overseas, and that Kano himself competed in inter-style matches against jujutsu practitioners.
The Dai Nippon Butokukai was founded to bring together modern Japanese martial arts, promote martial arts, preserve ancient martial arts, integrate techniques with other styles of competition, and honor martial artists. During the Pacific War, it came under government control, but after the war it was dissolved by GHQ, who deemed its nationalism dangerous. What was the Dai Nippon Butokukai that led martial arts to a position unparalleled in other countries and developed techniques to an unparalleled level? The Dai Nippon Butokukai awarded people who contributed greatly to martial arts. The lowest title is Renshi, but simply receiving the title of Renshi from the Dai Nippon Butokukai is proof that the person has first-rate skills in the martial art. The highest title is Hanshi. Some of the early Hanshi were real samurai just a few years before. We will introduce some of the Hanshi who possess top-class skills in each martial art, with a brief profile for each martial art.